Support for Higher Education in Focus comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, serving alumni and alma mater for 145 years. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. Penn State Bookstore, improving the student experience at Penn State with philanthropic support of student causes throughout the university. On the Hub lawn or at psu.bncollege.com. The attorneys of McNeese, Wallace, and Nurek. Your mission, your goal, your lawyers. More at mwn.com. Higher Ed Jobs, a comprehensive list of open faculty, administrative, and executive positions at colleges and universities across the U.S. and worldwide. Online at higheredjobs.com. And from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to a special edition of Higher Education in Focus. I'm Patty Satalia. This episode takes us to Harrisburg, where Penn State President Eric Barron met with Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf to discuss the role universities can play in driving economic development and job creation in Pennsylvania, as well as efforts to improve access and affordability. They'll also discuss the governor's 2015-16 budget proposal, which would restore higher education cuts made under the previous administration. Under the plan, Penn State, including Pennsylvania College of Technology, would get $282.5 million. That's a 22% increase over last year. What does the governor expect in return? Here's their conversation.
So, Governor, first of all, just thank you so much for joining Higher Education in Focus. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me here, President Barron. It's good to be here.
So, I can tell you from top to bottom, Penn State and I think every other university is thrilled in the fact that you've made higher education a priority, and so I would love to talk about that, but maybe we could start with a little bit about your own education.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a bachelor's degree from Dartmouth, a master's degree from the University of London, and a PhD from MIT.
So committed to education right through your own?
I am. Actually, I was a teaching assistant at MIT, but then I also spent a year teaching courses after I finished my own coursework. There was an opening in the faculty, and I stayed on. So I have a little experience teaching at the higher education level.
Teaching's a lot of fun. So I have a quote from you, actually. You say you don't want to be a part of the first generation of Pennsylvanians to tell their kids that they have to leave the state to be successful.
Right.
And I feel very much the same way. And you say to build a better Pennsylvania, you have to do three things: jobs that pay, schools that teach, and government that works. So how do you pull off such a big agenda?
Well, that's a good question. I think I start with, try to even make that tighter and say the best social policy is a good family sustaining job. If we work back from that, how do we, in a limited government democracy, in a place that believes in the free market, how do we partner with the people we ought to partner with, the institutions we ought to partner with, to allow our citizens to have those good jobs? And I think it really comes down to jobs that pay, schools that teach, government that works. Those are three things that we need to do in terms of education. I think that is a huge investment. There's not a lot that government can do, but I think those few things that we can do, we ought to do well, and one of them is make sure we invest in education.
So you've taken that path and made the statement that you'd like to see the cuts that occurred in the last 7 or so years to be restored, perhaps 50% at a time. So what's the motivation behind that dollar amount to come in and actually return quite quickly to the university system?
Yeah, I want to do this over a 2-year period to restore the cuts that have been made, and I think that's my concrete show of support for education, and that support comes from my understanding of education and my belief that investment, early childhood, K through 12, and higher education, the institutions of higher education, if we do that right and in the higher education area, restore those cuts, that we're going to get a return, that we're actually going to get closer to that goal of having really good jobs for people who want them in Pennsylvania, right here.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think actually the universities are really almost chopping at the bit to sit there and actually work much more deliberately in economic development and job creation. You have another part of this, which is that you have a message about holding the line on tuition. And so what is clearly the message that you're providing to the universities in the state of Pennsylvania?
Well, I'm a couple things. First of all, I think accessibility and affordability is just that's an important thing. That part of getting a good return is making sure the investment is reasonable. We don't want kids to leave schools saddled with huge amounts of debt. And I think one of the things we can do is try to hold the line on tuitions. I think also that I'm making a statement that I think higher education is really important, and that I think the Commonwealth ought to be making fulsome investments in higher education. And I'm doing that in a political environment where there's some skepticism as to whether that's a good investment. So I'm asking the institutions of higher education to which the taxpayers are being asked to make this contribution to see something in return. And it's this partnership that I want to establish. I think it's part symbolic, but I think it's part real, that we have to figure out, not through just this tuition freeze as a first step, but let's figure out how we can make higher education affordable and accessible. Let's make a statement to the citizens of Pennsylvania that we actually care about this, and we're going to do our part in working together to figure this out. And this is a gesture that we're going to make to show good faith.
And there are now getting to be an increasing number of studies that show that the lion's share of the tuition increases can be tied to the fact that the state started to slow their support or to cut that support, and so we go from a common good to passing it on to those folks that are being educated. And I can step back and say, well, Penn State numbers on graduation and on loan defaults, they look pretty good. They look pretty good in the state. Yeah. They look pretty good in the nation. But one of the things that we see is that it's actually the need-based students that are struggling even more. They're working too many jobs. They're taking longer to graduate. And many times they give up because they're borrowing money and then look and seeing what a slow pace there is. And now we really see this as a national statistics, that this portion of our population is choosing not to go to college. Does the state have a role beyond that tuition issue where what everybody is paying to see that need-based student is not paying more for their education?
Yeah, I think the Commonwealth does have a role to play. And I think the institutions of higher education, we can all work together to figure this out. And now there are two sides to that equation. One is the amount of money that we're asking people to invest in higher education. And that affects low-income students as well as middle-class students. It affects everybody. And so one of the things we can do is to make sure, as I said, that we are trying to hold that affordability line as well as we can. The other side of that is to make sure that there's a return on whatever level of investment we make, so that if you come to an institution of higher education, you get a degree or you get some education, that education is relevant to the needs that you're going to see when you go out to get a job, that you're getting skills, that you're getting the background that you need, so that when you go to a prospective employer, you go to start a job or a business, that you have what you need to get a return on the investment, whatever it is that you've made. So I think we need to work on both sides. I think the Commonwealth can work with institutions of higher education. In my budget, for example, just one specific program, I'm proposing to invest $5 million in the industrial resource centers, specifically to have them work closely with institutions of higher education to figure out how to make sure that the skills that institutions of higher education, like Penn State, are giving their students have relevance to the commercial world, their commercial applications.
You know, do you care if I have a brag moment or two in here about
Brag
Penn
away,
State?
brag away.
So we had over 1,500 companies visit this last year and do interviews with more than 9,000 students. We think this is one metric that tells us that we are delivering a lot of those skills that the students want. You know, one other thing that we're keenly interested in.
By the way, can I just to pile on your brag moment?
Yeah.
One of the, I think the Wall Street Journal has an index on business schools where they look at recruiters. They simply ask recruiters where do they find the best students. So the number of recruiters coming to any college campus or business school campus is a good metric. Is a good metric.
It's a good metric.
Yeah.
You know, one of the other things we worry about is there is this attention to tuition and tuition increases, and we've said, you know, even before your generous budget for higher education, that we were going to take a lot of our campuses to no increase, and if funded, we're going to take a lot more of them to no increase.
All of us in Pennsylvania appreciate that.
Yes, well, yes, it's true. Well, one of the other things that I think is missed in the news coverage of this is the number of students that are taking 5 and 6 years to graduate. And then you come down to a different metric, which is the total cost of a degree, as opposed to the tuition increase.
Yes.
And so to go a 5th year is an enormous tuition increase. And I'm just curious, when you were going to school, was going 5 years or 6 years for an undergraduate degree a common thing?
4 years was a common thing, but now, in the interest of full disclosure, I dropped out of college to join the Peace Corps. I had sophomore standing when I went to college, and so I really accelerated my time.
Yeah.
I had a little time, but it took me 5 years to graduate. I was in the class of 71, and I graduated in 72. So I'm one of those who took 5 years to graduate for a different set of reasons.
For a wonderful reason.
Yeah, but you're talking about the folks who, if they take a 5th year, it's a huge increase in the cost of their college education. So again, to the extent that extra year is the result of lack of preparation, when they get we need to fix that. To the extent it's the result of tuition costs that are so high that people have to have 1 or 2 extra jobs that it takes them that much longer to get their coursework done, we got to address that too. And I think the Commonwealth can work with institutions of higher education to do it. To the extent it's because they dropped out to join the Peace Corps, I think it's probably not.
That's different. That's a choice.
That's a choice.
Yeah,
right.
and it's okay to make a choice, I think, for a worthwhile experience that helps you. The ones I worry about is that you missed a prerequisite, and there should have been a warning system there, or too many jobs. And financially, you're better off not to work and get done in 3.5 than you are to go slowly and borrow throughout the whole time period.
Right, and I think there are things that maybe the Commonwealth can do in partnership with institutions of higher education, but there's so many good things that you're already doing, and I think other colleges and universities are doing to try to address this issue. I think, again, we get back to affordability in all its different dimensions. And I think some really interesting things are coming out of colleges and universities looking at this issue on their own.
Because we're thinking about it seriously.
Right.
The only one I don't know how to fix is when a student says, I want 1 more football season. And now I've discovered they even have a name for it. It's called the victory lap. You're done, you've finished all your classes, you've got your major done, and you take a victory lap. It's a very expensive victory lap, I think.
You'll have to deal with that on your own, I think.
I don't know how I'm going to do that one. So I need help from Mom and Dad, I think, in that particular one. You know, in that same vein, one of the things that you want to invest in is more counselors at the high school level. And is this part of the thought to in terms of having that preparation and being ready and therefore making time to degree shorter?
Yeah, I think, again, making sure that we do everything we can in the early childhood education phase, the K through 12 phase, to do a good job in those areas, you're going to have a better time doing what you need to do at the higher education level. So yes, my investment is not just in higher education, it is that, but I'm investing in early childhood education. We want children coming to kindergarten ready to learn. And in the K through 12 stage, we want kids to get an education that is relevant and fulsome, so that when they go out to professional school, they go to Penn State, whatever they want to do after high school, that they have the education, the foundation they need to hit the ground running and do a good job.
It's incredibly important. You know, one more question on the cost of a higher education. When we look at it, the students that go years 5 and 6, the last class we could count, borrowed $23 million to do that. The state of Indiana is looking at a program Indiana University started, financial literacy, just telling a student that here's your payment, and when you're 40 years old, you'll be done paying it. And they claim that borrowing dropped $30 million a year. So I'm looking at $53 million if I can work on these two things. Do you think this notion of actually creating a much greater emphasis on financial literacy has the potential to scare people away from college, or do you think this is part of what we should be thinking about to make sure that a student goes with their eyes wide open on what they might be borrowing and what they might be paying, and sharing your room instead of having a private room, for example?
I got to admit, I'm not as familiar as you are with the Indiana program, but it sounds like something that's very promising.
Worth thinking about, yeah.
Sounds like could be a great idea.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to experiment with it.
Great.
And we'll see where we go from there. So if we switch now from one topic that you're keenly interested in to another topic you're keenly interested, which is job creation in the state of Florida. And
Pennsylvania.
And did I really say Florida?
You were from.
Oh, do you know I'm going to
so
hear about that?
I
am going to hear about that. How did that happen? I just don't know.
Well, I think we.
Sometimes just bad habits. Sit there and go, okay, jobs in the state of Pennsylvania.
Right.
Okay, I really do think that's funny. So we both have a common interest, and that is we'd like our students to decide to create their companies and do what they want to do right here in the state of Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so part of our thinking has to be how do we energize and do that. And you know, Penn State is an $800 million research gorilla, and huge potential for economic impact. And actually, you might be interested that the National Science Foundation just ranked every discipline in science, technology, and engineering where they are in external funding. And so Penn State ranks second in terms of the number of areas that we're in the top 10 of funding in science, engineering, and
Who's
technology.
number one?
Johns Hopkins is number one, and we're tied with MIT
All
for
right.
number two. So it's right there.
Good company.
This works really well here from your background. So what advice would you give a university to drive that $800 million into our marketplace?
Well, that's a great question, and I keep saying this: the market is indifferent to geography, but you and I can't afford to be.
Yeah,
we care about where our students end up,
we do.
And we want them to be here in Pennsylvania. I think one of the things we can do is do a better job. There are a number of things, but one of them is to make sure our graduates understand the virtues of Pennsylvania. I built a business actually twice in Pennsylvania. It's a great place. We have a great location. I mean, Penn State has a great logistics department and is doing some really wonderful work in that area, and it's really appropriate for Pennsylvania. We have a great workforce. People are hard workers, and that is something that's important. So I think if we talk about what we have here, it's a beautiful state, great institutions of higher education, great cities, so many good things. That might incline people to at least look more favorably on Pennsylvania. But I think also we can do a better job of connecting the classroom to the workplace and say, you know, this is a good place to set up a company. A lot of alumni from institutions of higher education end up opening up their businesses, if they start one, close to where they got their degrees, because they know the professors, they want to continue to
have those
connections and relationships. So having a great university like Penn State in Pennsylvania is a great starting point. But I think you know, outright encouragement to stay here, creating those links. Again, my $5 million investment that I'm proposing with the Industrial Resource Center, say, you know, let's use this money and set something up here in Pennsylvania, close to where you learn the skills that you're going to apply here. I think we have a head start on everywhere else. We just haven't exploited that to the extent we should.
I think we really do have to exploit it. There's it's an interesting issue to study and talk to people about it. And I'm watching some graduates go off and decide to do their startups in Silicon Valley. And they're going to pay a premium to do that.
Yeah.
But they see a certain density of entrepreneurs and also they're sitting associated with a big private. And the statement is that publics have to be very careful about promoting startups because we're very risk adverse. We end up in the newspaper if we do something wrong. And are we taking a public dollar and making a bet on a company? And so do you think this aversion to risk should be holding back public universities and sitting there saying, no, we've got to help drive our students into creating these companies right here?
No, I don't think we should. And if you look at the rest of the world, I mean, some of the places that are known for robust economic development, Austin, Texas, that's right in the heart of a public.
Yeah.
Seattle, Washington, University of Washington, public university, and even Silicon Valley. I mean, Stanford is there, but so is Berkeley, public university. So I think we can blend reasonable risk with being a public university. And Penn State is really more private than public. You get a lot of public support, but you get a lot of private support too. And I think you should feel free to take the risks that you need to take to get the returns that you want. I mean, failure is a matter of, it's just a function of life. It's certainly a function of the free market. But what Silicon Valley shows is that a few big successes can be more than an offset to a lot of failures. And just the willingness to embrace risk and potential return, I think, is a big thing. And I think we need to instill that in our students, that life is a risk every day in so many different ways, and certainly going into business is a risk.
Well, and I think there's a lot of potential in Pennsylvania for partnerships that change this game, where we're not making the bet, but we're connecting more with our communities. And we're in this mode where we're trying to consciously have the space outside of State College and now 6 other Commonwealth campuses. And we literally want our faculty and students to step off the campus and believe that they're creating their companies in the community and feeling that level of support that is in that community.
That'll keep them in the area.
I think it will if we make it easy. I think it really
Well,
it really will.
Keep in mind places like Penn State, you're already taking a lot of risk. You take a risk every time you admit a student. You take a risk every time you make an investment for your endowment portfolio. This is no different. You're taking some extra risk that could have a big return, because if your alumni succeed in big ways, typically they remember where they got their start.
They do, and it's an interesting thing, because some people say, you don't own the students' intellectual property. They're not your employees, and so why invest money to help those students be successful? Part of it's an educational process. Even that failure is a bit of an educational process. But my bet is they're going to pay back the next president and the next president.
I think so.
I'm hoping they all say, that Eric guy really helped me along back there a decade or two ago.
I'm sure they will.
So do you think we're on the verge of kind of a different social policy, a different approach to higher education, where we don't just think about education, teaching a student, and publishing, but we also think about the degree to which we're actually directly serving society?
Yeah, well, I think you've always done that. I think it's been both. I think we've maybe not acknowledged as much as we should that basic research that gets done actually is really relevant and a wonderful thing for society. Just one last story. I know we're running out of time, but MIT, an example of this is MIT. I think it's in the astrophysics department. Somebody was doing some work and discovered a way to identify dark matter in the universe. Now, what relevance could that possibly have to the real world? But They figured out that same technology could be used to identify stuff coming in and closed containers on ships, and actually had some very practical applications.
Very practical applications.
So I think one of the things that we need to acknowledge is a lot of the stuff that goes on in places like Penn State, in laboratories that maybe you wouldn't even think of, actually do great things for our economy and our society.
Governor, I so much appreciate your time. Thank you for joining Issues in Higher Education.
Thank you very much.
Higher Education in Focus. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for all you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
That was Penn State President Eric Barron talking with Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf. They met in Harrisburg to discuss the role of universities in driving economic development and job creation in Pennsylvania, as well as a number of other important issues related to higher education. For more information on this series and an archive of past episodes, visit wpsu.org/infocus. For all of us here at WPSU, I'm Patty Satalia. Thanks for watching.
Support for Higher Education in Focus comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, serving alumni and alma mater for 145 years. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. Penn State Bookstore, improving the student experience at Penn State with philanthropic support of student causes throughout the university. On the Hub lawn or at psu.bncollege.com. The attorneys of McNeese, Wallace, and Nurick. Your mission, your goal, your lawyers. More at mwn.com. Higher Ed Jobs, a comprehensive list of open faculty, administrative, and executive positions at colleges and universities across the U.S. and worldwide. Online at higheredjobs.com. And from viewers like you. Thank you.